I woke up one day to a lawsuit that changed my life forever, because my former roommate, a woman I trusted, committed an actual crime and used my biological material to impregnate herself without my consent. This is a story about biological theft and why I am now legally and financially bound to a child I never agreed to father. It all started when my roommate, let's call her Sarah, came to me 3 months ago looking devastated. Sarah and I had been living together for about 2 years and were good friends. She knew I was sterile and that I'd banked sperm years ago before a surgery that might have affected my future fertility. She said she had received a terminal diagnosis and that doctors gave her 6 months to a year to live. She explained she had always wanted to be a mother and, since she didn't have time to date or go through a full adoption process, she was desperate to use an anonymous sperm donor from a clinic as a final wish. I felt awful for her, so I spent the next week helping her research clinics and donor profiles. She decided she was going to proceed with an anonymous clinic donor, and I figured that was the end of it. But 2 months later, I moved out to live with my fiancée, leaving Sarah in the old apartment. That's when the first weird thing happened. I got a notice from my fertility clinic saying that my banked sperm samples had been withdrawn. This was impossible, as I hadn't authorized anything and was still actively paying storage fees. I immediately called the clinic, and after a couple of days of internal investigation, they dropped a bomb on me. They told me that a woman claiming to be my fiancée, who had a surprisingly accurate amount of personal information about me, including my mother's maiden name and our shared apartment lease, had come in 2 months ago with a forged withdrawal consent form. The clinic, seeing the forged signature and the personal details, had released a sample for immediate use. My blood ran cold, and the first person I thought of was Sarah. I contacted her immediately and demanded to know what was going on, and she initially played dumb, but when I mentioned the forged documents and the sperm withdrawal, she broke down. She confessed that she had lied about the terminal illness, that she had been trying to get pregnant for over a year and couldn't find a donor she liked, and that she felt entitled to my sperm because, in her words, "You weren't going to use it anyway, since I already had my fiancé." She admitted to going to the clinic with forged papers, taking my sample, and successfully using it for IVF. When I asked her, horrified, if she was pregnant, she simply said, "Yes, about 8 weeks along now." I felt sick to my stomach because I hadn't just been betrayed, I had been criminally and biologically violated. The conversation with Sarah went downhill fast. She kept trying to justify her actions by saying the child would just be hers and that I wouldn't have to be involved at all, but I knew immediately that wasn't how the law works. When I told her what she did was illegal and that I was contacting a lawyer, she changed her tune and became incredibly aggressive, saying that since she was the one who carried the baby, I had no rights and no standing in court, which was a huge lie. I immediately reached out to a lawyer specializing in reproductive law, and what he told me was a total nightmare. Because I'm the biological father, and the sperm was used for the purpose of conception, regardless of the fraudulent means, under the law in my state, I could potentially be held legally and financially responsible for the child through child support for the next 18 years. The lawyer said that while the civil fraud case against Sarah was strong, the paternity case was complex because, legally, the baby is mine. My fiancée was distraught, and she insisted that we sue Sarah immediately and try to get the sample back. But the lawyer explained that since the conception was successful, there was no way to undo the pregnancy. My only legal recourse was a pre-birth declaration of non-paternity based on fraud, but even that was an uphill battle because she had used my biological material. The emotional toll was instantaneous. I went from planning my wedding to planning a massive, expensive legal battle against a woman who had been my friend. I had to tell my fiancé that through no fault of my own, I was now potentially tied to another woman for almost 2 decades. Sarah began spreading lies about me, claiming I had consented and then backed out of an agreement, trying to turn our mutual friends against me. Her goal was clearly to establish a narrative that she was the victim and that I was trying to abandon my responsibilities. The friends who knew Sarah was terminal believed her initial lie about the cancer, so when I told them she was pregnant, they were supportive of her, thinking I was the one trying to dodge a responsibility I had agreed to. I had to expose her initial lie about the terminal illness just to get people to believe the gravity of the situation. My lawyer is preparing a massive civil suit against Sarah for fraud, battery, and emotional distress. But the core issue remains. How do I legally sever ties with a child I didn't consent to father when the legal system prioritizes the child's financial well-being? Faced with massive legal fees and the risk of losing the paternity battle, I decided to hire a private investigator to dig into Sarah's past. I needed undeniable proof of her pattern of deception. The investigator uncovered something chilling. Sarah had a history of schemes involving fertility. I was not her first victim. He found evidence that 2 years prior, Sarah had attempted the same exact scheme with a different friend, though she was unsuccessful in obtaining the sperm sample due to tighter security at that clinic. The investigator also confirmed that the terminal illness she claimed was a complete fabrication, used solely to manipulate me into letting down my guard and helping her research clinics. My lawyer used this new evidence to strengthen the civil fraud case, aiming to prove malicious intent and a pattern of biological theft. Meanwhile, Sarah's aggressive demands continued. She started sending me threats, saying she would go public with the claim that I was an unwilling donor who abandoned his child, attempting to smear my reputation online and potentially impacting my fiancé's teaching career. The emotional manipulation was relentless. The biggest challenge was the cost. Sarah's legal team filed repeated motions to delay the paternity hearing, knowing that the longer the process dragged on, the more financially drained I would become. I realized her strategy was to simply run me out of money until I was forced to settle and accept paternity. My fiancé and I had to put our wedding on indefinite hold and start selling personal assets to cover the mounting legal bills. This wasn't just a legal fight. It was an active financial war waged by a desperate, entitled criminal. The lawyer also told me about the worst-case scenario. If I lose the pre-birth non-paternity hearing, I would be legally recognized as the father, which means not only child support, but also visitation rights and a legal standing in the child's life, a child whose existence is the result of criminal fraud. This means I would have to interact with Sarah for the rest of my life. I had to weigh the impossible choice: go bankrupt fighting Sarah in a legal battle I might lose and still have to pay child support, or accept the paternity and try to negotiate minimal involvement, essentially allowing her crime to stand unchallenged. Sarah continues to text me, claiming I should just be a man and accept my child, demanding that I start paying for her prenatal care. She has no remorse and sees herself as a clever person who found a loophole, not a criminal who stole a piece of my biological identity. The truth is, I am trapped in a financial and legal nightmare with a woman who should be in jail, and now I have to decide how much of my future I am willing to sacrifice to avoid being forced to be a father. So what do you think? Should I bankrupt myself fighting Sarah in court? Or should I accept paternity and child support just to avoid the legal fees and end the nightmare? If this unbelievable story shocked you, hit that like button, subscribe for more drama, and I'll see you in the next one.